The envelope trembled in Sarah Mitchell's hands as she stood on the marble steps of what used to be her home. Behind her, the August sun beat down mercilessly, but she barely felt its warmth. All she could feel was the cold weight of the divorce papers she'd just signed, and the even colder realization that her marriage of 12 years had ended in the span of a single afternoon. Through the tall windows of the mansion, she could see her ex-husband Marcus already laughing with someone new. A younger woman in a yellow dress who stood far too close to him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It had been less than 3 hours since the lawyer had left. The word Barren echoed in her mind, the cruel label Marcus had thrown at her like a stone. Just 2 weeks ago, when the final IVF attempt had failed, that single word had shattered everything she thought she knew about love, commitment, and the man she'd married. What Marcus didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask about, was the letter tucked inside the envelope Sarah was holding. A letter that would change everything. But by then it would be far too late. Sarah had met Marcus Mitchell 13 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. She'd been 28, working as a librarian, living simply in a small apartment with second-hand furniture and dreams she kept tucked away like pressed flowers in a book. He'd been 32, ambitious, a real estate agent climbing his way up with determination and charm that could light up a room. He'd spilled coffee on her favorite cardigan, apologized profusely, and insisted on buying her a replacement. Instead, she'd laughed and said it gave the cardigan character. That laugh had captivated him, he'd said later. It was genuine, unguarded, rare in the circles he was beginning to travel in. Their courtship had been simple. Walks along Lake Michigan, dinners at small Italian restaurants, where the pasta was homemade and the conversations stretched for hours. Marcus had appreciated her down-to-earth nature, her lack of materialism, her contentment with life's simpler pleasures. Or so she'd believed. They married a year later in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with just a handful of friends present. Sarah had no family to speak of. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, leaving her alone in the world except for a distant aunt in Oregon, whom she barely knew. For the first few years, they'd been happy. Marcus's real estate business grew steadily. They moved from their modest apartment to a comfortable house in the suburbs. Sarah continued working at the library because she loved it, because being surrounded by books and helping people discover stories brought her joy. They'd started trying for a baby in their 3rd year of marriage. When it didn't happen naturally, they'd consulted doctors. The diagnosis had been devastating: unexplained infertility, with Sarah's body refusing to cooperate despite being otherwise healthy. Marcus had been supportive then, holding her while she cried, promising they'd find a way. IVF became their hope and their obsession. 1 round, 2 rounds, 3. Each failure carved a deeper wound in Sarah's heart. She watched Marcus's patience wear thin with each negative test, saw the way his jaw tightened when friends announced pregnancies, noticed how he began working later and later. By the time they attempted the 5th and final round of IVF, Marcus's real estate business had exploded. He'd made several large commercial deals, and suddenly they were moving into a mansion with white columns and a circular driveway. Sarah had felt uncomfortable in the ostentatious house, but Marcus insisted it was what successful people did. The 5th IVF failed on a Tuesday in July. Sarah had taken the test, alone in the bathroom of their palatial home, watching the single line appear with a sense of numb inevitability. When Marcus came home that evening, she'd told him quietly, watching his face close off like shutters being drawn. "I can't do this anymore," he'd said, his voice flat. "I want a family, Sarah, a real family, children, and you can't give me that." "We could adopt," she'd whispered. "We could—" "I don't want someone else's child. I want my own legacy." He'd turned away from her, staring out at the manicured lawn they paid someone else to maintain. "You're barren, Sarah. That's just the reality. And I've met someone who can give me what I need." The word had hit her like a physical blow, barren, as if she were nothing more than an empty field, useless, without value. The divorce had been swift. Marcus had excellent lawyers. Sarah had signed everything in a daze, too heartbroken to fight, too depleted to care about money or property. She'd take her books, her few personal belongings, and leave. That was all she wanted, to leave and never look back. Now, standing on those marble steps with her boxes already loaded in her old sedan, Sarah looked down at the envelope one more time. The return address read, Pemberton, Whitmore and Associates, attorneys at law, Portland, Oregon. She'd received it 3 days ago, but hadn't had the emotional strength to open it until this morning, just before the final divorce meeting. The letter inside had been from her Aunt Eliza's attorney, Aunt Eliza, whom Sarah had seen perhaps 5 times in her entire life. Aunt Eliza, who had died 3 months ago at the age of 87. Sarah's hands had shaken as she read the words. Your aunt has named you as the sole beneficiary of her entire estate, valued at approximately $30 million, including real estate holdings, investments and cash assets. $30 million. Her aunt had been an eccentric woman who'd invented and patented a specialized type of medical equipment back in the 1970s. The royalties alone had made her wealthy, but she'd also invested wisely and lived frugally. She'd never married, never had children, and apparently had been quietly keeping track of her only niece from afar. Sarah had never known. Aunt Eliza had never mentioned wealth in their brief, awkward encounters at family funerals and the occasional holiday card. And Sarah had certainly never mentioned it to Marcus, because she herself hadn't known until after he'd already filed for divorce. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Marcus had divorced her thinking she was just a small-town librarian, with nothing to offer but a broken body and second-hand furniture. He'd chosen someone younger, someone fertile, someone he assumed would fit better into his new wealthy lifestyle. He had no idea he'd just walked away from a fortune that dwarfed his own real estate success. Sarah climbed into her car, carefully placing the envelope on the passenger seat beside a box of books. As she started the engine, she glanced one more time at the house. Through the window, Marcus was kissing the woman in the yellow dress, his hands on her waist, already replacing Sarah, as if their 12 years together had been nothing more than a failed business venture. She felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of release. She realized, sitting there, that Marcus's cruelty had given her something unexpected. Freedom. Freedom from a man who valued her only for what she could produce rather than who she was. Freedom from a marriage that had become a prison of failed expectations and diminishing love. The money didn't make the pain go away. It didn't heal the wounds of infertility or erase the word barren from her memory. But it did give her choices. She could travel. She could start a foundation for women struggling with infertility. She could open the community library and literacy center she'd always dreamed of. She could live life on her own terms. Surround herself with people who valued her for her kindness, her intelligence, her capacity for love. As Sarah pulled out of the circular driveway for the last time, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus's lawyer. Mr. Mitchell requests that you leave your house key in the mailbox. Sarah smiled, a real smile this time. She'd already left the key on the kitchen counter. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't need anything from that house or that life. 6 months later, Sarah would read in the local paper that Marcus's latest real estate deal had fallen through, leaving him overextended and in financial difficulty. The woman in the yellow dress would leave him shortly after, apparently attracted to his money more than his character. By then, Sarah would be standing in a newly renovated historic building, surrounded by shelves of books and the laughter of children in the free literacy program. She'd started. She'd be dating a gentleman, a teacher who loved her for exactly who she was and who'd already mentioned that he'd be honored to adopt children together if she wanted, or equally happy if they built a life just the two of them. But on this August afternoon, driving away from her old life, Sarah simply turned on the radio and let the music wash over her. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers. And sometimes, she realized, the greatest fortune isn't the money you inherit. It's the freedom you gain when someone who never truly valued you finally lets you go.